Welcome back to another Monday morning musing, everybody. I'm sure, as you can tell in the background of this audio, it is raining quite hard where I'm at, so I apologize that it's in the video recording, but, you know, that's part of life, I suppose. Anyways, it's good to be back on the channel itself. I've spent most of last week on, it seems like everyone else's channels, it seems. I was on Conscious Caracol's channel, and then Apostolic Majesties on a debate stream, which, of course, if you noticed yesterday's video, that's what I was talking about. But this morning, on my lengthy 45-minute commute to work, I was listening to Skeptical Waves, who's a channel that you should subscribe to, by the way, for the content he puts out. I was listening to an excellent audio quality recording, text-to-speech kind of deal, of Nick Land's The Dark Enlightenment. And of course, it has been so far an excellent sort of analysis of Mencius Moldbug's work, his own writings, and an overall critique of liberal universalism and contemporary democracy. One issue that I thought Nick Land had raised a pertinent point of is that the more a majority population becomes the minority, the more tribalistic its voting behavior becomes, which is why the Republican Party in the United States has been primarily so white for the last 50-some-odd years. And I thought to myself for a moment that that sort of like racialized aspect of politics, and I tweeted about it this morning, so you can definitely tell this isn't a Monday morning musing, but rather a Monday evening musing, but I like the alliteration, so it stays. And what I had noticed is that the racialized aspect of divisions are not a relatively recent development. In fact, it is a feature of contemporary Western liberal democracy rather than it is a bug. And the reason why I describe it more as a feature than a bug is because even prior to the current state of our demographic and immigration issues that we see currently now and have been dealing with for the last 50 years, we saw this within the previous wave of immigration to the United States as well. Long before we were concerned about current changes, long before Pat Buchanan wrote Suicide of the West, long before even James Burnham talked about death in the West, it is important for us to realize that race has been an aspect in which democracy utilizes to drive wedges between various populations in order to develop its own sort of advantage in its own systems. It seeks to break down sort of the ethnic homogeneity of the population in order to bring in voting masses, which we see here. And bio-Leninism is not a relatively recent concept either, at least in terms of the idea of how it's been used in the past. And we're currently seeing it now with our spiteful mutants, whether it's blue-haired individuals or the obese black lady at the TSA or DMV, but it was done hundreds of years ago as well in the United States, whether it came from Irish or Italian or German immigrants, in the same way that we treated them just as badly as perhaps we do some of the more less welcomed individuals that now come across our shores and across the U.S. southern border. So it is definitely a feature, not a bug, of contemporary democratic systems. Now, what does this mean? Well, as I've been spitballing here, this is a certain feature that we've noticed in our current democratic systems, which means that immigration is an issue that will never be fully regulated, let alone in a way where you'll see a moratorium. The cathedral will do whatever it can to defend its access to its next voting bloc. And as we've been able to tell when it comes to how the leftist ratchet turns when it comes to issues of race and varying ethnicities, eventually what will happen is that a system will be put in place in order to mitigate the likelihood of new groups coming in. That way you can manage the populations that you have to pit one against the other. It's what we're seeing currently right now with certain racial coalitions, especially with what's going on with the attacks against the, what they call it, the AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander communities. Despite the fact that overwhelmingly the majority of the attackers are of African American background and descent, they have to be united against white supremacy, white nationalism, white terrorism, all the things that aren't actually at all related to the current sweeping amounts of violence that we're seeing both against the Asian community, but in general overall. So the way that the ratchet turns, of course, through bio-Leninism, but of course through no actual restrictions on immigration, despite the fact that Biden is saying, hey, don't come over here. Of course, we're already seeing farm bills being put in place to provide amnesty for farm workers. We're seeing bills that were passed earlier at the beginning of the year in regards to tech workers and H-1B visas from foreign countries. There is definitely a heavy racial aspect to the current democratic system. Whether or not that ever gets fixed is the next question. But again, we can spend all day debating on the nature of how do we address these issues. But the fact of the matter is that it won't be addressed until we finally come up with a pathway to institutional power. And that, I think, is what's going to be important for the next few years ahead. Is that, one, you find a way to find your own communities and survive the coming long winter. But two, we must either find a way to recover from the wreckage of what I believe will be an accelerationist position, to which the legitimacy of the cathedral will flounder and flail, and as it loses more and more power, it will lash out to develop and manufacture more consent in order to address itself and assert itself into more power, which is what we're seeing with the American military being put on the Middle East, more focus of the American military rooting out extremists, or quote-unquote extremists. All of this is indicative of a quickly dying regime. However, just in the same way that land articulates about populations becoming more tribal, the cathedral itself will also do the same, which means you are going to see an increased amount of these border crises. You're going to see an increased focus on things like statehood for Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. The racial aspect of democracy will continue to drive itself as a wedge in order to promote more and more, I would almost just call it an organized sense of political chaos, in order to continue an age-old tradition of bringing people in order to ensure that your interests can simply be outpacing the birth of those who don't. And to me, I think being aware of this fact is important for us when we describe democracy, because what aspect of democratic systems do we do? Well, simple. We'll just vote more people in, and vote more people until we get exactly what we want. And I think that is a demonstrable fact when it comes to these democratic systems. It is a feature, not a bug. And that's my spicy take for this Monday evening. I hope that yours has been a good one so far, and if not, well, then Tuesday is just around the corner. This is The Prudentialist, and I hope that you all have enjoyed these sort of unscripted rants. Do let me know what you think in the comments. I'll see you all in the next video, and until then, be prudent, everybody.